in your own time.
Right, good afternoon everyone. We're going to talk to you about Ryanair and SAS and their relative performance over the last sort of couple of decades. We've got myself, Charlie, Sam, Cara, Jack, Michael and Havard. And we're going to start with Jack, who's just going to give you a brief introduction to both the companies just to give you a bit of a better idea about them both.
Okay, so we'll start with SAS. They're a Scandinavian airline system. They were founded in 1946 and their parent companies were Danish, Swedish and Norwegian. They're also they were the first airline to fly the polar route, so they went from Copenhagen over to LA, and that was in 1954. And then in 1997, they were a founding member of the Star Alliance with 4 other airline companies across the world. And their aim to begin with was to be able to take passengers to every major city on the Earth. They were later divided into 4 companies in 2004. Which were Swedish, Danish and Norwegian, and then the last one was an international one. And finally, they were reunited as one company in 2009. They are the largest Scandinavian airline. The closest competitor they have is Norwegian Airlines. They pride themselves on being innovative, so for example, the polar route, because they were the first to do that, they've been the first to do many things. So another one would be, in 1954, they were the first company to introduce the electronic reservation system. And so they very much pride themselves on being the highest quality airline that people can fly with. They have a strategy plan for excellence, which was introduced in 2011. It focuses on those 4 bullet points down there, and I'll come on to that later in the PowerPoint, but yeah. Next up we've got Ryanair, who was set up by the Ryan family in 1985. Their current CEO is Michael O'Leary, who I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. He's quite a character, I suppose, is the best way to describe him. A little interesting fact, their first route actually was on a 15-seater aircraft, so not a very big aircraft, and it was so small, the aircraft, that only cabin crew under 5'2" could operate inside, so, you know, not very many of us in here. They, in 1990, became the airline with the lowest fare in every market, so that included following restructuring because of Aer Lingus and BA growing so massively. And that included changing to a single aircraft carrier type and stuff like scrapping of free drinks and meals. They then announced their first year of profit the next year, which was quite a good thing for them because obviously it's a step in the right direction. It wasn't quite as big as their loss the previous year. Their loss the previous year was £20 million, so 293,000 doesn't sound like a massive deal really. But yeah, so they also that year switched their main base from Luton to Stansted. Stansted was then a new airport, so that was quite beneficial for them. And then in 1997, they launched their first European route, which went from Dublin to Paris and to Brussels. Okay, so if you look at these graphs here, this one on the left shows how their passenger, like in millions, how many passengers they've been able to take over a year. And the one on the right I found particularly interesting because it compares them to their main competitors of low-cost carriers. So EasyJet are the only other one really there that really can sort of stay with them, but they're still a good 20 million behind. Okay, I'll pass you now on to Cara.
Okay, deregulation in the airline industry. So airline deregulation is the process of removing government-imposed entry and price restrictions on airlines affecting, in particular, the carriers permitted to serve specific routes. In the US, the Airline Deregulation Act, which was introduced in 1978, removed government control over fares, routes and market entry from all commercial aviation. Airfares quickly fell by a third and traffic more than doubled through the 1980s, as new low-cost carriers such as American West and Southwest Airlines sprung up offering cheap point-to-point flights. After 1978, this led to some very similar regulatory changes occurring in Europe, following America's model, but in a more gradual way. Firstly, the British government sought competition rather than monopoly control in the UK, privatising British Airways in 1987. In 1991, the CAA, Civil Aviation Authority, relaxed certain rules allowing new airlines to fly into and out of Heathrow for the first time since 1977. Subsequently, in 1992, European Union transport ministers agreed plans for a new open skies policy. This meant that there was now freer access for airlines to new routes throughout Europe. It allowed greater freedom for airlines to set their own seat prices within certain protective safeguards and lower barriers to entry for new carriers. I'm now going to hand you over to Sam to discuss how this transformed the prospects for Ryanair and SAS.
So we'll start with Ryanair. As a result of deregulation, competition for each firm increased as they lost their monopolistic power. This meant cutting costs and improving productivity to achieve profits. The deregulation opened up the rest of Europe to Ryanair, and it was seen as a massive opportunity for, at the time, a rising business. Their product differs from traditional models in Europe in terms of both price and service standards. The punctuality performance of Ryanair is high because of the customer product characteristics and the airport served. The simple point-to-point airline product is not delayed by interlining passengers, and check-in and boarding is quicker. Ryanair also operates from secondary airports, which means less airport congestion. However, the most significant contribution to Ryanair's low-cost base comes from its labour productivity by having an extremely high number of passengers per staff member ratio. For example, European Airlines 2003 found Ryanair to have 10,050 passengers per each staff member, compared to just 898 with SAS, suggesting their prospects were actually quite good. Consequently, Ryanair, Europe's biggest low-cost airline in 2014, reported net profits of €523 million and a traffic increase of 3% to 81.7 million passengers. However, regulatory changes transformed the prospects for SAS in a different way. By the mid-1990s, all companies from the EU countries were free to establish air traffic services in Scandinavia, when SAS was the single largest airline with a market share of about 1/3 of the total air travel market. Each year, almost 30 million passengers travelled with SAS. However, this increased competition caused SAS to implement a major programme of cost savings and restructuring, underpinned by three main strategies: flight safety, punctuality and service, which suggests they stand in good stead as they decided to act quickly. Unfortunately though, in the third quarter of 2014, SAS reported a year-on-year decline in profits, reaching a loss of 9 million. It has made good progress with its cost reduction programme, but costs are not falling fast enough to offset tumbling yields, and SAS remains one of Europe's highest cost airlines. I'm now going to pass it on to Charlie.
Right. Firstly, starting with Ryanair, I'm just going to discuss some of the things that, aside from deregulation, led to their really sort of success in the last sort of 10 years. And some of the ones up there you might look at and think for an airline that's quite shocking, but like we touched upon before, Michael O'Leary is quite a strange character, and he sort of goes with this motive of cheapest is always better. First of all, in 2009 he made a decision to remove all check-in desks and check-in staff, as this was a result of 97% of their customers already booking online and 75% using online check-ins. He told the Telegraph newspaper that this was in order to pass savings on in the form of cheaper flights, but despite this, online fees actually rose. This leads on to one of their most criticised aspects of the airline suite, which is hidden costs. Someone called Andrew Lobenberg, who's an aviation market specialist, analysed Ryanair's business model not many years ago, and revealed a number of these hidden costs that people wouldn't even consider when booking a flight. For example, it's £6 for an online check-in, which was up from the previous £5. There's £40 to pay if you forget your boarding pass. Payment handling fees on the website tripled. Credit card charges were introduced, it was just £2 for every £100 spent on one. And since 2000 fees, hold baggage fees actually tripled as well. They went from £20 to £30 for one bag, and then £40 to £70 for two bags. And his reason for this was that he wants to encourage people not to have luggage. All these sort of short, sharp flights, he thought that people would just be happy to take hand luggage on. And he doesn't have a limit for hand luggage weight, by the way. And also, you might have heard of their free seats policy. Turns out you actually have to pay for a supposedly free seat. These are free seats issued to sort of disabled people, wheelchair access, stuff like that, but then they actually charge you to have wheelchair access on the airplane, which I thought was a little bit shocking. Despite that though, these hidden costs contribute to £500 million a year, so it's a massive source of income for the company. Sam briefly touched upon it on his slide, the 25-minute turnaround time. Simply, once the plane lands, they want to check it, check safety checks, clean it, and get it back up in the air within 25 minutes. However, this came with a lot of cleanliness and safety points inside the company being criticised. Channel 4 Dispatches programme actually did some secret undercover filming, And on one of the flights that one of the filmers was working on, a baby had been sick towards the end of a flight in the back of the aeroplane. And then because they were under so much time pressure, the number one cabin crew member actually told them not to bother clearing it up because they were so pushed for time, and he actually used a bottle of perfume that they found left behind on the plane to cover up the smell. So that's the sort of pressure they get put under. Another one actually that was filmed that I thought was even more shocking was the slide on the aircraft plane door has a little warning signal that flashes or comes up red if there's any problems with the slide. And then obviously you have to get someone to come and check it, make sure it's all okay. The number one cabin crew spotted this and actually didn't do anything about it on this particular flight. Other areas Ryanair have managed to increase their source of revenue is through their staff, making their staff pay to wear their uniform. £25 a month is what they currently charge, and they also charge you £1,400 for joining the company in the first place. So you would have thought with all these sort of costs coming in through their staff, you would have thought it'd be a really good training programme. Well, it's actually far from it. Again, in the dispatches programme, an exam invigilator was filmed telling the staff to open up their books, telling them what questions were in their final exam, despite Ryanair claiming that all their exams are closed book exams as well. And along with this, they don't get any simulator training throughout their time as a Ryanair trainee, which is shocking compared to some airlines. Next up is the aircraft themselves, where they've cut back massively on. Recliner seats, legroom and magazine holders are now a thing of the past on Ryanair planes, along with onboard sales contributing to 20% of their revenues. Cabin crew work on a commission basis as well on their planes, so the more sandwiches they sell, the more they'll get paid. But not only do the passengers on side their planes contribute to these onboard sales, the crew do themselves. They aren't entitled to any food or drink on their planes, neither are the pilots. So if a pilot wants a bottle of water, he's got to pay for it, I'm afraid. Moving on is the rise of social networks, such as Twitter. Michael O'Leary, the chief exec, became a lot closer to his customers and would find out exactly what they think of his company. These technological advancements led to what some might describe as an epiphany for Michael O'Leary, and that is being nicer. Now, as you can see, this is a quote that he might have come out with in the past. You're not getting a refund, so star off. We don't want to hear your sob stories. What part of no refund don't you understand? Along with that, he said, people say the customer is always right, but you know what, they're not. Sometimes they are wrong and they need to be told. That's the sort of thing he came out in the past. But he's gone from that. But once the penny dropped, he started to put passengers higher up the order of importance. He started to come out with quotes like this. On the other hand, if I'd known being nicer to customers was going to work so well, I would have started many years ago. It's an Irish dynamic. We're charming chappies generally. We've made an institution of being nice to people. So what seemed like a pretty obvious approach in business, if you ask me, led to a 32% jump in profits and a reduction of complaints of 40%. There were 4 more passengers in the summer of 2013 and 20 more passengers in the winter of 2013. And also in the winter, their profits actually rose, which tends to be a loss-making period for Ryanair. And that ultimately led to a 45% higher profits in 2013 than they received in 2012. 770 million up from 750 million. So something as simple as just being nice actually paid off. I'm now going to pass over to Jack again, who's just going to briefly run through some areas where SAS succeeded or failed in some places.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll start with a video that kind of highlights what SAS are all about. So,
recently, one of the world's leading travel authorities, Fielding Sky, said, quote, "The remarkable growth of Scandinavian airlines is based on service, and still more service. Their interest in the passenger can't be touched by any transatlantic competitor," unquote. The next time you're going to Copenhagen, Singapore, or any of the 102 places we fly the world at a slightly higher level. Fly SAS.
okay, so that kind of hammers home what SAS are all about. They want to provide the high quality at the high cost. They're willing to accept the high costs to provide what they can. This links in with their 4 excellence scheme that I kind of mentioned earlier. It kind of the four things in it are commercial, sales, operational, and people. So commercial-wise, when they look for commercial excellence, they do things like they want to simplify and clarify their product to their customers. They offer loyalty rewards, which links in with this thing called a Euro bonus. This has won a Freddie Award multiple times, which is something quite renowned in the aviation industry. Sorry, that is kind of like an SAS Euro bonus is like a Tesco club card. Like you collect points on it when you fly with them, and you spend it on stuff like hotels, on just clothes, treats for yourself, basically. And that like sort of goes with the sales side of things, and they kind of use the Euro bonus, and they also prioritise their most substantial revenue streams. Operational wise, they have three key areas that they focus on, which are safety, punctuality and care. Like they don't look at, we're just going to cut costs, we're just going to cut costs and get you there. They really focus on the customer and make them as happy as possible. They also renew their fleet very often to make sure they have the most efficient airlines. So, moving on. Their recent performance hasn't been great, so since about 2006-ish it hasn't been the best. In 06 and 07 they had a few strikes from some of their unions. So for example in 07 they had one from the pilots union in Denmark, which caused them to cancel hundreds and hundreds of flights. It wasn't even an official strike, it was just they all called in sick and organised all called in sick on a couple of days. And then basically they just reflected really badly on SAS, and that kind of, because the recession immediately follows, that kind of compounded the problem, and because all of their customers then wanted to move to cheaper airlines, and then also because their competition of Norwegian airlines were much more low cost, and like Ryanair are more low cost. Other ones, Lufthansa is probably their biggest one, which is a German airline. They're also very low cost. Alright, I'm going to pass on to Mike.
Once I first started researching airports and airlines, I thought to myself, are there any worldwide regulations out there? And one of the things I came across was the worldwide slot guidelines. The idea of these guidelines is to maximize benefits to all the users of the airports while keeping the airports as efficient as possible. But to achieve this, they need to put a lot of constraints and limitations on the capacity of certain airlines. And also, not every country has to follow these guidelines. So everything comes down to one thing: slots. Slots are pretty much a time frame where an airline can use to depart and arrive to airports, and hence use all the facilities within that airport. If an airline uses a slot multiple times, then you get what is known as historic slots, which means that an airport just reserved the spot for that airline from that moment forward. If an airline uses 80% of their slots, then they get to keep all of them. If they use less than that, then they lose the ones that they didn't use. So this leads to a few problems. If a country does not follow these guidelines, then obviously an airline cannot reserve a slot, hence they can't expand to that country. If they do follow these guidelines, then the airline needs to wait for a slot to open up before they can expand. And once they have expanded, due to the constraints they can reach their maximum potential. So as you can see, outside the EU, SAS and both Ryanair SAS only has 15 destinations outside the EU, and Ryanair only 6 outside the EU, which just shows you how hard it is for European airlines to expand outside the EU. So I'll pass on to Howard.
I'll talk about SAS first. The Scandinavian governments are planning to, or possibly planning to sell their shares. And in this year's national budget from Norway, passed on the 19th of December, the Parliament approved the government's plan to sell off their shares partially or in its entirety in the SAS. Continue. The Danish and the Swedish governments haven't passed this as of yet, but they have been open to the idea. They have talked about it since 2004 actually, but they haven't done it yet. Moving on. the European Commission has been pushing for more environmentally friendly policies. Probably won't go through.
So I've got to
in the
stop
way
you right
that-
there.
It's the last slide.
20 minutes. I've got to
Okay.
stop you right there, sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Can we get a round of applause, please? Would you like to stop the video and then if you'd like to take a seat for a couple of minutes?